Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Deb Hodgson. I'm co-founder of New Hampshire for Safe Technology, along with Jen White and Lori Schreier. And my unplanned journey over the last 5 years is what has led me here today. In the fall of 2017, my husband and I had scheduled to have our home measured for RF on our return from a hiking trip out west. I had planned to come off blood thinners, and I was aware that wireless can thicken the blood, so I thought maybe that was a prudent precaution to take. I also had been having issues with insomnia, constant ringing in the ears, heart arrhythmia, palpitations, tooth and jaw pain, dry eye, facial flushing, dizziness, and blood pressure issues. I had developed severe pressure headaches that felt like my brain was swollen or on fire. I had great difficulty thinking, speaking, and remembering. I even got lost several times in the town I've lived in for nearly 40 years. I did not yet know it was all related until we removed the wireless from our home and cars. My health quickly improved. My seemingly unrelated symptoms disappeared as well. Interestingly, the plant in our kitchen that sat there doing nothing for over a year suddenly grew 15 inches in just 2 months. That was an eye-opener to everyone in my family, since it's much easier to believe what you can actually see. Realizing this is an issue that ultimately affects everyone, I stepped out of my comfort zone, way out. With a little push from reading EMF off and the support of Cece, despite knowing others will certainly think I must be crazy. I held 2 public screenings of Generation Zapped and reached out to many, including legislators. My state rep, Patrick Abrami, was truly exceptional. He actually listened and responded. He investigated the science and was successful getting New Hampshire to pass the first US law to begin addressing technology safety. The New Hampshire Commission on Health and Environmental Effects of Wireless Technology was established in the fall of 2019 and produced a groundbreaking report in the fall of 2020. The New Hampshire Commission report is a great place to become informed, to empower you to protect yourself, your family, and your community by becoming aware and learning how to use technology safely. We at New Hampshire for Safe Technology, along with Cece Doucette of Mass for Safe Technology, are supporting the Commission's work through community information sessions like this, and we thank you for being here. Our speaker today is Cece Doucette. Cece is a tireless supporter to us here in New Hampshire and everyone on the EMF issue, and we are grateful for her. Welcome, Cece.
Thank you so much, Deb, for that kind introduction. And I'm just so honored to work shoulder to shoulder with you. The accomplishments that you guys have made up in the New Hampshire legislature is really just groundbreaking. So I'm honored to be here with everybody tonight. Please know we are having a rock and thunderstorm here and in New Hampshire right now. So if our connection goes a little fluky, just hang in there. It seems to be stabilizing after a few seconds. And if we should lose connection altogether, just click back in through the Zoom and we'll readmit everybody. So thank you again for joining us tonight and taking time out of your already very busy lives. None of us ever imagined that this is what we would be doing with our time. But I would like to let you know that I'll be going through a set of slides today. And what we'll do following our presentation is we'll render the recording, and when that's ready, then we'll send that out along with my slides. So anything that you see in my slides that has a blue underline in it means it's an active link. And when you have my slides, you'll be able to drill down into whatever areas interest you and you want to dig a little deeper. So this MTPW after my name just means that I had the privilege of earning a master's in technical and professional writing from Northeastern University. That's where I also earned my undergraduate degree in communication. And I never imagined this is what I would be using my skill set for. But I'm so very grateful to do education around technology safety. So like most folks, I had no idea there was anything to be concerned with regard to wireless technology. And in fact, I used to run the local education campaign for my children's schools the Local Education Foundation. And I ran 8 different campaigns throughout the years to get the initial wireless infrastructure in our schools, to get Chromebooks and iPads and smart boards and minis. I did all sorts of fundraising. And then at book group one night, a girlfriend of mine who's an electrical engineer tipped me off that there could be biological effects from today's wireless tech. And I thought, wow, if there's anything to that, I'd like to know. You know, I'm a tech writer, and I wondered, is there any science behind this? So I just started poking around, and I am just astounded that there are literally thousands of peer-reviewed studies all over the world showing that this wireless tech came to market with no safety testing, and it's now extraordinarily harmful. And in a few minutes, we'll walk you through what the science actually tells us. So I raised my hands at the school and said, you know, I think we have a problem here. And I got back crickets. This is not an easy conversation to have with your schools, because what we came to learn is that the wireless industry got in at the state level and pushed in their 21st Century Classroom campaign with the goal to have a one-to-one device in the hands of every child. Now, from a marketing perspective, that's kind of brilliant, because once you have a child as a consumer, you often get to keep them for life. Unfortunately, it's extraordinarily harmful, and even more so to children. But when I started sharing the science that I was finding with our school committee, one former chairwoman, she went and she looked at what the top lobbyists were up in Washington, D.C. And if you look at the top 100 ever, you find telecom, you find energy, you know, you find technology, all these people who have such a major stake in financial gains from wireless technology. Another one started sharing information with me. You know, we're passing back information like the French National Library took wireless out in 2008 because of the health risks. There were schools in Israel and Belgium and Italy that were already pulling wireless out. So again, it was not an easy conversation to have, but ultimately we became the first in the United States to have this little sign hanging in our classrooms with best practices for mobile devices. And this tells us to turn these things off when not in use, because the industry has kind of seduced us into all Wi-Fi all the time. And so we don't even know any better because it's invisible. And we just leave this pulsation of microwaves, pulsing, spiked, erratic, all day and all night. They also said to turn the Wi-Fi on only when needed. So not at the device level, you know, we can control that, but also turn off the antennas in the ceiling, the wireless access points, also turn off the routers, and always place the device on a solid surface other than your body. And like my mom used to say when I was a little kid, stand back from the TV screen, because we understood even then that close range is really harmful to the eyes, but also the electric and the magnetic field that comes off of these man-made devices really overpowers our own body's electrical circuitry or our own electromagnetic field. So it wasn't easy, but we did become the first in the nation to even have this sign, and that's inspired others to pick up the conversation and start talking to their schools. So, but we realized that our schools were waiting for higher authorities to tell them what to do. So I went to my state representative and I went to my state senator, and my state senator, Karen Spilka, I met for local coffee hours, and I showed her the science. I showed our little sign, and I measured the radiation coming off of her cell phone and her district director's laptop, and both devices went way off the charts into the red zone. And Senator Spilka's looking at me like, really? And I said, yes. And nobody knows. I said, we are now just like we were with big tobacco, with alcohol, with pornography, with gambling. Adults will make their choices, but everybody should at least know there's a great risk. I asked, is there anything from where you sit that would allow us to at least get information out to the public? So Senator Spilka put me with an attorney in her office, and we got together and crafted a very simple bill that said, let's get the right minds together at the state level, form a commission, and investigate. And as we'll show you in future slides here, we've had legislation to address man-made radiation for going on 10 years now. And in 7 months, we were able to educate the New Hampshire legislature. They passed it by the House, they passed it by the Senate, and Governor Sununu signed it into law that they had to form a commission and investigate this issue. And we'll walk you through how that process went. It was really remarkable. So we're still working on legislation here in Massachusetts. On this journey, I'm just so humbled to have met many of the world's leading scientists and doctors. And like Deb, far too many people have become injured by this microwave radiation. And on this journey, I was connected to people over in Europe. A couple, Brett and Lynn West, he had brought wireless systems into major construction projects in the UK. He's a technologist. And he figured out that wireless was harmful. His wife is a graphic artist and a media specialist. And then we were introduced by Dr. Deborah Davis, who's a Nobel Peace Prize co-laureate on climate change. She's now one of the leading authorities on this wireless issue too. She introduced us to Brett and Lynn, and also to Dr. Mikko Ahonen in Finland. And Mikko is one of the leading scientists on this, who's also a conscientious objector and would not, follow industry line at his university. And it has cost him dearly, as it has many of the scientists in this area. So Mikko and Brett and Lynn and I worked together, and we came up with an online course for schools and families that can be completed in about a half an hour online. We just recently changed platforms and it's now back. We literally have off-the-shelf training ready to go today to train your entire school district, your entire town, your entire company, and of course your family and your loved ones. So for less than about the cost of a movie ticket in about a half an hour, we have highly credible training ready to teach the masses. And then when I was at the State House in, I think it was maybe 2015 or 16, Dr. Deborah Davis brought a panel of world leading experts to the Massachusetts State House. And I was on my own for the first 2 years. So to go down to Beacon Hill here and be in a standing room only forum with people all over the Commonwealth of Massachusetts who knew about this issue, it was so gratifying. So I got to connect with others who had been working on this, and ultimately we formed Massachusetts for Safe Technology, which I direct. And so every month we do a strategy meeting on the third Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern. Anybody around the country or Canada, we have folks from Europe, anybody's welcome to join us for any of our meetings. We all learn from one another. So we have a good website that has all the science listed on our resources page. We have a state efforts page that shows what's been happening here in the Commonwealth. And we also include our New Hampshire successes there as well. I like to include this link to a conference that I was invited to back in 2018. It was called the Health in Buildings Roundtable Conference, and it was held down at the National Institutes of Health. I was invited to co-chair the technology panel, and this was a couple of days worth of government agencies, hospitals, city planners, architects, all of the certifying associations like LEEDS and green schools, and it was really an amazing conference. And for the first time, the wireless issue was put front and center. We were only allowed 10 minutes each in our discussions on this panel. And I was so fortunate to bring with me Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada. And when he was in the industry for 30 years, He had no idea that wireless was harmful. When he retired, he was approached by some of the scientists and he learned, and then he went and sought out a dozen of the world's leading experts on this and came back and said, here in North America, the FCC guidelines aren't protective. Canada's Safety Code 6 is not protective. And he challenged his industry, if you can prove to me that this is safe, please give me a call. And his phone has never rung. So he resigned from all the boards that he was then serving on. And he founded Canadians for Safe Technology. And he's up there in Canada helping to educate the public and trying to work with Parliament. But boy, there's a lot of industry capture in all of our federal governments, even at the state level and oftentimes at the local level. And as we'll see in a few slides, it goes all the way up to the World Health Organization as well. So Frank Clegg from Microsoft Canada flew in and joined us for this panel. Dr. Martin Paul, who's one of the world's leading experts, he joined us and talked us through the science. We had Peter Sullivan, and I found Peter's work when I was watching a YouTube video on autism. And Peter had been a former fighter pilot right up there with Top Gun. And he's up there with the Earth's really high electric and magnetic fields. And he also had radar on the planes, right? And so he had the instrumentation panel inside the plane. So he was getting a walloping dose of man-made electromagnetic radiation. And so Peter's health, and then he went on to become an engineer in Silicon Valley, and his health began to decline. He got rail thin, all these other wacky symptoms like Deb announced, and his teeth started getting really brittle too. So Peter didn't know what was taking down his health. And then when his two sons, one by one, came in through the preschool years, they both wound up on the autism spectrum. So Peter started doing his research. He did what a lot of parents will do, and that's to remove all the food toxins from the diet and go to a clean, organic diet. He went so far as to have the heavy metals removed from their bodies. And now, knowing what he knows today, he says the first line of defense he recommends to families with an autistic member or two is to do the digital detox and start by creating a sleep sanctuary, shut everything off for 12 hours a night so the kids' bodies can do their proper cell repair and regeneration. So we see oftentimes what would have seemed to be miracles. We don't ever want to overpromise because every individual body is different, but neither one of Peter's sons, who are now grown men, are on the autism spectrum because they cleaned up the harm in the environment. So Peter joined us on our panel. And then we also had Theodora Scarrato, who's the executive director of the Environmental Health Trust. And Theodora's organization was founded by Dr. Deborah Davis, who was that Nobel Peace Prize co-laureate on climate change. And she is one of our leading scientists. She helped to get smoking out of airplanes, among other major accomplishments in her lengthy career. And so they have arguably the world's strongest scientific think tank, as well as an amazing database of worldwide actions to move the needle towards safe technology. So I like to share this link here at the Health and Buildings Roundtable Conference because our talks were short. And when you share this with others in 10-minute, boom, 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 you will be able to add great credibility to this issue. Now, one of the major gaps we had when I fell down the rabbit hole in 2013, 2014, is that so many people were getting sick and they would never know to connect their symptoms with what their environmental exposures were, including microwave radiation. So we'll use a number of terms interchangeably today that all kind of mean the same thing. The EMF Medical Conference stands for electromagnetic fields. These are the man-made pulsations of radio frequency radiation that's in the microwave segment of something called the electromagnetic spectrum. So you'll hear RF for radio frequency, you'll hear EMF for electromagnetic fields. That's the spiked erratic pulsations coming at us. You'll hear microwave radiation, but it all refers to this man-made light energy form. So we were so grateful to Dr. Lynn Patrick, who did the first EMF medical conference here in the US in 2019, and then to Elizabeth Kelly, who established the second medical conference in 2021, right as the pandemic was hitting. So we had to pivot and learn how to deliver the conference online and record all of the speakers and then go live with all of the panel discussions at the actual conference. So up until July 1st, that medical conference was available for 24.5 professional continuing medical education credits. That opportunity just expired, but Dr. Libby Kelly and others just came back from a tour of Europe where they gave presentations, and she's working on getting those videos out. As soon as she's done with that project, she'll double back on the EMF medical conference. And although the professional credits are no longer available, she is hoping that she can make the conference itself still available so that we can ask our healthcare practitioners to be trained. And also citizens who are suffering from this can really get into the nitty-gritty of what this is doing to us at a biological level and what to do about that. So please know when we send out our slides after the presentation in the coming days, you will be able to go through and dive into whatever areas interest you the most. So I was honored to be asked to speak at the EMF Medical Conference on the inroads that we've made with our schools and with certain legislatures. So if anybody has questions, I would be honored to answer those. We will open up the Q&A at the end of my presentation tonight. So we appreciate that everybody stays with us and doesn't start lengthy side conversations in the chat. But if you have questions, please do pop those in and we will address those at the end of today's presentation. So that's how I got involved. And I think what prompted my schools to become the first in the nation to even have this little sign and training every year for our staff before the kids come back on campus is when they saw the legal fine print that comes with all of our devices. For anybody with us today, if you have an iPhone, I invite you to take that out right now and go into your settings. And for anybody who uses a different platform like a Google phone or an Android, if you just do a search on your manufacturer and your model and then type RF exposure, again, that's for radio frequency, you will come up with a similar set of fine print disclaimers. So once you're in settings on an iPhone, you can also go to this website from our friends at the Environmental Health Trust. They have culled out a lot of the fine print disclaimers, like this one, for example. On the iPad, it had told us, you may experience seizures, blackouts, eye strain. And who knew? And here we spend hour after hour in front of our devices. Okay, so from settings, scroll down a little ways and hit general. On a really old phone, you would hit about, and then you'd go down to legal and regulatory. Today, I think you can probably go directly from general to legal and regulatory, but that little acronym GAL may help you to remember where to find this in case you want to share this with others. Once you're in the legal section, about 4 down, you will see RF exposure. And that legal fine print tells us a couple of really important things. One, they tested this device at a distance from the body. So if you're tucking it in your bra or your suit pocket or your shirt pocket, or you're putting it in your waistband or in your back pocket, you are exceeding the Federal Communications Commission's public radiation exposure limits, which, by the way, were never safety tested for biological effects. They were only tested for heat. And we'll talk a little more about that later. When you go down another paragraph or two, it says to reduce your exposure, use a hands-free option like the headset or speakerphone. And the reason they tell us that without, really disclosing what that really means, is that these devices are given to us. I'm going to stop sharing for a second to give you a demonstration. These devices are given to us with multiple antennas in every device transmitting. So in our cell phone, we have a cellular and data antenna. We have a Bluetooth antenna, a locator, a hotspot, a Bluetooth, and Wi-Fi, did I say that? For anybody who didn't know any better, there's also an array of new antennas in the 5G phones. And so the message is not no technology. The message is safe technology. We love it and we live by it, but it's high time we be given the facts so that we have choices in how we actually access the technology today. So what I'm going to show you now is something called a hollow tube or an air tube headset. It plugs into your device as a normal headset would, but one of the properties with microwave radiation is it amplifies around metal. So if you're plugging a metal wire into your device and then putting the headset right up to your brain, that just creates a direct pathway for that radiation to go right into your brain. So for every problem we've created, we can show you a solution. So with this hollow tube headset, you want to plug it in and put it as far away from put your body as far away from the transmitting device as you can. And then the signal will come up to here where you've got great audio controls. And then it goes up to these little ferrite beads that break the radiation. And then it just goes up to simple hollow tubes that operate like a doctor's stethoscope. So you get great acoustics, but notice these are just little rubber tips. There's no metal going up to our brain to conduct from the phone or to draw in the ambient radiation in the air around us. So look for something called a hollow tube or an air tube headset. And then what I want to do next is give you a demonstration. So it is really hard for us to get our heads around these invisible toxins, just like with COVID. We couldn't see it, taste it, smell it, feel it. But a lot of people do feel this invisible microwave radiation. They just don't know that this could be causing their symptoms. So knowing what I know, and it took me a while to get my head around this. So if I can help you connect the dots faster, that's what our goal is tonight, is to simply
Wonderful.
deepen your education.
We'll do it.
So this is a radio frequency radiation detection meter. See how it's flashing in the green? That's the lowest signal we can get. So that's pretty good. In the scientific literature, they want that spiked pulse of microwave radiation, the maximum peak, to be at 10 or less. And the unit of measurement is something called a microwatt per square meter. And here in my home, knowing what I know, I just hooked everything up with Ethernet cables and adapters. And then I went into the settings of every device and just disabled every antenna I could find. But you really have to measure, because with 5G and the Internet of Things, their goal is to attach these radio frequency antennas to every product you buy so they can track you, so they can harvest your data and sell it to third-party vendors who have an interest in selling you their products. So my home right now is at 1.3 microwatts per square meter. Science wants us to be at 10 or less. But I want to give you a real live demonstration of what happens when I take my cell phone out of airplane mode and allow those multiple antennas to start transmitting to make or maintain a handshake with the nearest cell tower or look for a router. So I've come out of airplane mode. We are now flashing in the red, which is the highest end of this meter. I'm not doing anything other than allowing this to start transmitting. Okay. I really don't want to expose myself, so I'm going to put it back into airplane mode. And you see it dissipates and goes right back down after it clears through the air. But I want to tell you what just happened. So we were at 1.3 microwatts per square meter. Just turning my phone on, wasn't even streaming or doing anything. We went from 1.3 microwatts to 1,180,000. That's 1 million plus, and the science wants us to be at 10 or less. So that's the level of electrosmog that we have allowed industry to immerse us and our children and our pollinators and every other living cell on the planet in. So this Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter was actually recommended at the EMF medical conference. And now doctors are taking these into their practice and loaning them out to patients. One doctor here in Massachusetts loans it out to her patients for $10. So they'll take it seriously and says, you've got 2 hours. Now go home, do your scavenger hunt, measure everything, jot down where it's coming from and what the numbers are, and then come back to my office and we will teach you how to have safe, efficient, highly sustainable technology. So I'm going to go back into my screen share, and that'll take a moment just to load up. So when I learned that there were meters out there, I went to my town because I knew we had a pot of money that was distributed through our board of select persons that would do good things in the community. So I put in a grant application to get a radio frequency detection meter. And I thought, you know, let's get one for the schools, let's get one for the library so everybody in the community can go out and measure and at least gather the data and then decide what they want to do about it. That again was not an easy conversation. The first time I put in my application, our board of select persons was like, whoa, we don't really understand this. Come back next time. By the second time, they said, gee, this is probably more of a board of health issue. Why don't you go talk to them? So I went and talked to the board of health or the health agent for our town. And he knew about cell towers from the 1990s, and they were wined and dined as municipal leaders. They were brought out to fancy hotel dinners, and the industry was touting all the benefits of having a cell tower in your community. And if anybody brought up the health effects, they were told, shucks, you know, the Telecom Act of 1996 said there's no legal recourse if anything's, you know, if anybody's concerned about harming the environment, there's nothing that you can do. This is coming in. So he didn't know about Wi-Fi. He knew about cell towers at the time, and I was able to teach him that Wi-Fi we have full control over. And so by then, I had introduced legislation here in Massachusetts, and I had seen when I testified in front of the Joint Committee on Public Health, as I'm holding up Ashland's little sign, as I'm holding up my meter to show the harm and the science, that not one member of our Joint Committee on Public Health had any idea that this issue existed. So I told my husband, I really need some time just to go up to the State House and start educating. So I started meeting, you know, I was supposed to go back full time as a tech writer as our kids aged up through the school years. But Steve was very gracious and said, you know, go do what you got to do. And so I started getting meetings with every member of all the committees that had some of our now many bills in Massachusetts. And I would start this conversation with each one and say, so please help me understand what you might know about the biological effects of today's wireless tech. And literally after dozens and dozens and dozens of meetings, all but one said, well, I know, I really didn't know anything about this until you brought it to my attention. But there was one gentleman who said, I know a little bit, but why don't you come and tell me what you came here to tell me? And so I shared with him all the science and, you know, what other countries are already doing for protections. And then he confided in me that his father was the physicist who brought the team into Chernobyl after it blew. So he grew up knowing about man-made radiation. But out of all the legislators that I've met with over the years, he was the only one. So that taught me that I needed to double back in my town because they had no idea what was going on with industry pushing all this technology in. So one by one, I met with every member of our select board, and they all understood what I was saying. And one of them was a retired police officer. And he said, Cece, you had me at hello, because he had lost so many brethren to the radar guns that were mounted at the back of the cruisers, blasting all this microwave radiation right through their brains. And a lot of the police officers died of the brain tumors. And then others were getting cancers of the thigh from holding the radar guns on their laps. Radar is where this technology came from. It was developed as a military weapon for radar, for warfare. And then it was brought into the commercial market for you and I to have all this convenience with wireless technology. So after I educated my select board one by one, I resubmitted my grant application for the third time. And they were still a little uncertain about this, but they did give me funding, $400 to put the acoustimeter on loan in our library. So back in 2016, we became the first library in the nation to loan out a radio frequency detection meter. And anybody with an Ashland library card can go take that out from our circulation desk, share it with your friends and neighbors, your colleagues at work, measure your cars, measure your schools, and then return it so somebody else can borrow it. A doctor who I met at the medical conference, she came back, she's in Newton, Massachusetts, and she and I went after a state level cultural council grant and got one put in at the Newton Library. And then out in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where Verizon put up a cell tower illegally on top of a neighborhood, their Board of Health investigated for over a year and determined that this cell tower made the neighborhood homes uninhabitable. 17 children and adults got so sick that they had to abandon their homes. The children were vomiting in their beds. There were headaches, nosebleeds, this nausea, anxiety, skin problems, heart problems, cancers that had been resolved came back. And so out of their own local library budget, Pittsfield, at the suggestion of a citizen, Pittsfield put the Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter in circulation in their library too. So if I were making recommendations today, these are both terrific meters. This one has a few more current features to it. You can plug it in so you don't have to wear down your battery. So either one of these are great. The Safe and Sound Pro 2 is what was recommended at the medical conference. So I just did an interview with Theodora Scarrato from the Environmental Health Trust, and she let me know that they have a patron who has donated a small amount of funding so that if your library budget can't afford to put one of these on loan directly, they have a small grant pool if you want to contact the Environmental Health Trust at ehtrust.org. And you would need to go through your librarian and have your librarian put in a request. I know another library here could put 200 up for it. So maybe the Environmental Health Trust will be able to help with the other 200. So we're here to help. The Environmental Health Trust is here to help, but seeing is believing. And it's critical to have a meter, either of your own or one of the other members of New Hampshire for Safe Technology, Lori Schreier. She went in on it with her neighbors. And although these are in the $400 range, there are some really good meters for the consumer level at the $200 range too. So we have, like I said, solutions at every turn. So let's now take a look. Oh, before we do the science, I want to share with you that our cable stations are one of the last bastions of independent reporting. So my cable station has been wonderful. We've done a whole bunch of public service announcements. I've done interviews, and they came to my home with their professional equipment. And we did a 23-minute public service announcement that just does a walkthrough of my home that shows where all these common exposures are from the microwave oven, from the decked cordless phones, from our laptops, from our computers, our mice, our printers, all that we've been talked into giving up our wired connections and going wireless. So this is also, I think we've had 10,000 views on this already. It's a nice, informative, peaceful way to share the facts and then offer suggestions for how to have technology safely. The director at WCCA TV in Worcester has had me in for a number of interviews over the years with Patricia Burke, who's another advocate on this issue. And he reached out recently and said, Cece, I think it's time that you just have your own series. So they have offered me resources at WCCA TV in Worcester. And every 2 weeks, I get to go into the studio and invite guests in with me. I had Theodora Scarrato on recently. We're now releasing a video of Dr. Holly Groh, who's an ophthalmologist, and she teaches us about the harm to our eyes from being in front of screens and the damage that that's doing to us and to our children. So we'll be releasing that very shortly. And I think we've done 14 interviews along with a lot of citizens like Anne, who is with us tonight, who is fighting 5G small cells and macro cells right inside her neighborhood. She's up in Keene, New Hampshire, and she's brought me in to do education seminars up there as well. So anything we can do to help in your community, please do reach out. And on our last slide, we'll give you the contact information. So what does the science reveal? We're first going to look at the long-term effects, and then we'll step you through the short-term effects. So long-term, child and adult cancers. This graphic here is from the United States National Toxicology Program, which is part of the National Institutes for Environmental Health Sciences. They are arguably the gold standard for toxics research in the world. And they did the largest study they've ever done, $30 million over the course of a couple of decades. And they had an unprecedented 3-day peer review with world-leading experts from all over, whose life's work is investigating the biological effects of man-made radio frequency. And at the end of their 3-day review, they wrote their final report, and when that came out, they determined clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. Now, clear evidence is the highest of 5 categories that they could assign, and that should have triggered public policy to go in and bring the microwave radiation exposure limits in line with the science. But as we'll see in future slides, that didn't happen. So every time a good study comes out, the industry will get a hold of it and they will spin it. And in this case, they would say, well, that's just one study. We need more studies. Well, right on the heels of our major $30 million study that found cancer and DNA damage, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy released their large multi-million-dollar study. Ours was on cell phones. Theirs was on the cell tower base stations. And guess what? They found the same results: tumors, DNA damage, acoustic neuromas, thyroid cancers, and, all down the line. So we don't need more science. What we need is honest public policy that is there to protect the public over corporate profits. So DNA damage, as we know, DNA is the roadmap to grow a proper anything, from a child to an animal to a plant to a biome. And when bombarded with microwave radiation, it damages that, oftentimes irreparably. For me, it was actually the infertility studies that got me on my feet when I started reading the science. I learned that they've taken male human sperm and exposed it to a laptop with the radiating antennas, and it changed the DNA. It slowed the motility of the sperm, and it caused far fewer sperm to be viable. It caused something called apoptosis, or programmed cell death, in just 4 hours of exposure to man-made microwave radiation. So that was the day that I plucked up my courage and started speaking up to my local authorities about this, which ultimately led me to state, federal, and international opportunities to educate others. We now have studies out of, for example, Kaiser Permanente on pregnant women and the higher miscarriage rates of women who are constantly exposed to this man-made radiation. Now, neurotoxicity, everybody is recognizing that even before the pandemic, we were at epidemic proportions of anxiety, depression. We are seeing suicidal ideation among adults and children like we have never seen before. And what the science teaches us is that we have something called the blood-brain barrier, and that is a membrane. We also have a gut barrier. But we have these beautiful membranes to protect toxins from going into sensitive areas like the brain and the gut. What Dr. Palpatcher and other scientists long ago discovered is that when you spike this pulsed erratic microwave radiation at our brain, it opens up that membrane. It opens or permeates the blood-brain barrier. So now you've got holes in it. And as the blood would normally be escorting toxins out, it can take a left-hand turn and bring those toxins directly into the brain. So in nature, the earth has its own beautiful healing electromagnetic field that pulses electrons up for our plants, for our animals, for you and I at 7.83 times per second. That's called Schumann's resonance. So at 7.83 hertz, that's the unit of measurement. So about 7 or 8 times a second, if we connect back to the earth, we get this amazing healing energy that gives us electrons, that helps to knock out the bad stuff in our system and keep our own electrical circuits humming along quite nicely. Well, we've gotten so fancy with our man-made radiation. Instead of 7.83 hertz, we're now in the megahertz range with wireless. And now with 5G and other technologies, we're bumping up into the gigahertz range. So mega means 1 million times per second. We are getting jackhammered with radiation. And gigahertz means 1 billion cycles per second. We're getting jackhammered with microwave radiation. So it's no wonder that it's permeating our brains. And Dr. Hugh Taylor runs the OBGYN program at Yale Medical, and he's done some of the science on this with pregnant mice. And he saw that when they radiated the pregnant mice, like we're getting radiated today, when they delivered their pups, the pups grew up to be bouncing off the walls of the cage with attention disorders, much like a child with ADD or ADHD. Dr. Martha Herbert, who founded the Autism Lab at Massachusetts General Hospital, she is seeing huge connections between the families in her care and what we know scientifically happens with microwave radiation. And she describes it as we get to a tipping point where it's cumulative damage in our bodies and then we spill over. And, you know, just like with autism, this microwave radiation sickness also has a spectrum. These are all spectrum disorders. And so we need to learn better so we can do better. Dr. Martin Pall has culled the science on Alzheimer's, and we are now seeing that Alzheimer's used to happen just like cancers over decades, but now we're not seeing Alzheimer's just in 70 and 80-year-olds and beyond. We're now seeing people in their 60s, in their 50s, in their 40s, in their 30s, and even in rare cases, adolescents in their 20s getting diagnosed with earlier and earlier onset Alzheimer's. How long can we continue to pollute the environment of the brain? So, we're very grateful when organizations that are coming mainstream, like the Environmental Working Group, receive funding to put resources toward getting information out to the public. They now have a PhD on staff who's working on this issue in DC, but also putting out fact sheets. And this one was protecting kids from wireless radiation in schools or at home. They've also done another one on the central nervous system or the neurotoxicity. So if you know people like me as a mom, I first learned about the Environmental Working Group because of the incredible resources they have on pesticides. Every year they come out with the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen. to guide us on which produce you can buy conventionally grown, and which you should really look for organically grown because of the high level of chemicals that are absorbed into those foods. So we're very grateful to the Environmental Working Group. And as we learn about this, we need to be mindful that children are not just little adults. Their very systems are still under construction, and we know this is damaging their DNA. And as Dr. Om Gandhi and his colleagues show us through this modeling, when you put a cell phone up to the head of an adult, these are head models turned sideways. The yellow dot is the ear. When you put the phone up to the ear of an adult, that radiation is pulsating into my brain and yours about a third of the way through the brain. When you put the cell phone up to the brain of a 10-year-old child, it's absorbing into that brain about 3/4 of the way. And on a 5-year-old child, it is pulsating microwaves into that child's almost entire brain. So again, once we know better, we can do better. Many people recognize the microwave sickness, electrohypersensitivity, electromagnetic sensitivity symptoms when we start connecting the dots for them. Please know that the Americans with Disabilities Act has long since recognized electromagnetic sensitivities, going on almost 20 years now, and they have recommendations at this link for how to do accommodations. Insomnia is huge. Time and again, after one of these training webinars, people will come back and say, Cece, I didn't want to know about this. I didn't want to hear about it because I'm so dependent on my wireless tech. But a lot of these symptoms that you described really resonated. So I took a chance and I turned everything off at night. And oh my gosh, I slept through the night for the first time in ages. And what we know scientifically now is that we are regulated by light. That's our circadian rhythm. And in the wee hours of darkness, our pineal gland releases melatonin from the brain. The melatonin goes in and helps to regulate our sleep cycle, and also helps to do that cleanup from the daily toxic, breakdown, cell repair, regeneration, and escort those toxins out through the bloodstream. Well, what the science has shown is that our brain can't distinguish this man-made light energy form from natural daylight. So the brain's over there thinking the lights are on, and it's not properly releasing the melatonin unless we learn to turn everything off at night and let our brains do what they need to do in the wee hours of darkness. So people come back and say, wow, I slept for the first time in ages. This is amazing. Headaches, stabbing, searing headaches, pulsating microwaves. My daughter in high school got a migraine, an optical migraine. And what kid should be getting a migraine, right? So once we cleaned up our home, once I stopped circling my tail and really committed, I'm the mom, it's my job, I need to care for my child. We got rid of the wireless in our home, and my daughter's headaches all but disappeared, along with her nosebleeds, unless she let herself get dehydrated. Chronic fatigue is another big one. Pain from unidentified sources, skin abnormalities, heating, flushing, rashes, tingling, nerve damage, heartbeats that go too fast or too slow, cognitive impairment, where we can't remember what we were doing. It used to be we'd open the fridge and stand there and go, what did I come in here for? And it's natural as we age, we lose a little bit of our cognitive abilities, but this is happening to people at all age levels. Anger, behavior issues, and the anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation. It was heartbreaking to attend that EMF medical conference and have more than one of the presenters, the scientists and the doctors, say that if we don't stop radiating the populace, we can very well expect many more of these societal outbreaks like we've seen with the mass shootings, because we know through brain scans that this is changing the gray matter and the white matter of the brain. It's rewiring how our brain operates. And I remember during the pandemic when what did we do? We gave every child a tablet to go home and access their education with not one shred of health and hygiene safety training. And then all of a sudden, when the kids went back to school, we're getting reports of these children who are immersed in industrial strength microwave radiation in the classrooms now, with everybody's laptops and tablets all pulsating out like a pebble in a pond, all this microwave radiation. We're getting reports in 3 different schools of the kids wailing on each other, like beating each other up with their tablets. So we have got to make this a priority. Dr. Martin Paul has another collective study here where he culls the science and shows the evidence of neuropsychiatric effects, including depression. So all the science is here for you to look at. Unfortunately, it's not just about you and I and our children and our grandchildren and the future generations. It's every living cell on the planet. So our pollinators, our birds, we have species disappearing literally by the dozens. How long can we pulse these poor, highly sensitive beings with microwaves and expect them to survive? We have reports out of The Hague in the Netherlands, where they were doing 5G testing, and literally birds by the hundreds were dropping from the sky, either stunned or outright killed. Energy consumption. This is another dirty little secret the industry would prefer we not tell you. There was a Greenpeace analyst back in 2012 who did the research on how much energy wireless systems are consuming. And they said, you know, if the cloud were a country, it would be the 5th largest consumer of energy in the world. And that was more than a decade ago. And look at everything we've added since then. So this is a huge contributor to our energy problems. And then you can dive deeper at this link about the human atrocities that are going in places like the Congo. Our devices have dozens of different minerals in them. If we really understood the human toll that this is taking, we would never just toss aside a perfectly good device because the industry is pushing us to the latest and greatest shiny object. Data warehouses, networks, personal devices, all these are consuming vast quantities of energy in the background. And once we know better, again, we can do better. So when we take a look at how we use our devices, here are little baby steps we can start thinking about. Download anything you want to stream to your device and then turn all the antennas off. When you stream live for hours, that consumes vast quantities of data. Every time we send and receive, that's using data. Every time we charge, we recharge, it's using electricity in the background. And then all those apps that they talk us into putting on all of our devices, they're all in the background using energy with all these constant updates. So again, folks, once we know better, we can choose to do better. And those are some excellent little baby steps you can start taking. Get rid of all those apps that you don't really use and only turn them on when you need to use them. So after I became pretty clear through the science that we have a major public health issue here, I was scratching my head going, surely somebody's got to have our backs on this. And then in 2015, Harvard Law School Center for Ethics came out with this free online report called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission, or the FCC, is dominated by the industries it presumably regulates. So I read that Captured Agency report and I went, oh, look at this graphic they chose for their cover. It's a revolving door. And that's what many of our federal agencies have become. It's a mouthpiece for industry. Industry leaders get appointed to head up our federal agencies, and then they set policy that protects the corporate interests instead of the public interest. So that was my missing puzzle piece. And that's when I realized it's not good enough to just know about this. We have got to take care of this at the local level. And I was able to introduce Dr. Linda Birnbaum, who was the head of the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences when the National Toxicology Program did that study. And I introduced her to Andre Fouteau, who's been doing reporting on this up in Canada for decades. And they did an interview together. And Dr. Birnbaum said, yes, there are captured agencies, but there are still a lot of really good public servants at the federal level, but they need the empowerment to bubble up from the local and state level so that they have enough backing behind them to do their jobs. So it really is up to us to execute our civic duty and get involved, because there's no cavalry coming. There's nobody that's going to protect you, your children, your grandchildren in your community until we start the conversation. And we are here to help you do that. We can do the heavy lifting, but it takes citizens in every town to open the door to have those conversations. So this Harvard article came out in 2015. More recently, ProPublica has begun to report on this. And this is an article echoing the same findings that they had, that our federal agencies are captured. This is from November. And remember that $30 million study that our government did that concluded clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage? That should have triggered public policy. But instead, so the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, commissioned that study 2 decades ago. But all those scientists and qualified experts are long gone. The gentleman in charge today of the radiation at the FDA is this Dr. Jeffrey Shuren. And when that NTP study was done, what did he do? He went over to the FCC and said, let's just keep doing what you're doing. We see no reason for you to change the public radiation exposure limits. Well, one might ask, what would ever possess Dr. Shuren to do that? When you look at his background, and again, you don't have to look very far, you find that he's married to a woman who's a partner in a law firm that represents the wireless industry. So he should have been nowhere near that NTP study, but this is the state of affairs today. And you can drill down and look at the facts. And sadly, it goes all the way up to the World Health Organization, the United Nations. And oftentimes when I'm giving a presentation, somebody will go search the World Health Organization. And the first things that pop up are, well, gee, there's no real consensus on this. And who would know that there's 2 groups at the World Health Organization? One is heavily backed by industry, and the other is the qualified experts, the scientists and the doctors who are trying to protect our world. So when the US study and the Italian study came out showing clear evidence of cancer, the World Health Organization reopened their investigation, and they are supposedly doing an investigation right now that we should know more about in the next year or so. But we also see that there may be conflicts of interest even with that investigation. So we can't wait for higher authorities to fix this, but you can certainly go click through these links and find that, yeah, they are reinvestigating, and we should all be taking charge of this right now. So that's all the bad news. Let's talk about what we can do. Let's talk about solutions. So for yourself, your home, your loved ones, your schools, your work, a 3-step process. 1, just hardwire, and it's not rocket science to do. On the back of your router, you see we have Ethernet ports. This is how we always access technology. It was great. Plug in with an Ethernet cable, right? Run it to wherever in your house you use your technology. And then most of us have multiple devices today. And for example, when my daughter was down at the University of Delaware and got her first off-campus apartment, I sent her a care package, and I sent her a big 50-foot Ethernet cable because their router was out in the living room. And then I sent her this little thing called an Ethernet switch. You can just think of it as an extension cord or an extension box for electronics. It allows you to plug in a whole bunch of different devices. So the one that I have here in my house, and it's tiny, it comes in this little box. This one has 5 ports in it. But in a classroom, you could get one with 30 ports. You know, I think the one in my basement, we've got 16 ports in it. So whatever you need, the technology exists. And then you just get little Ethernet cables for each one of your individual devices. And who knew, for short money, you can buy little adapters. So this is the little adapter connected to the Ethernet cable that goes into my iPhone. It's called a Lightning to RJ45 Ethernet adapter. For the MacBook, you would get like a little Thunderbolt adapter. For the Chromebooks, you know, the iPads, these exist. And then you just go in to each device into the settings and you turn off all the wireless antennas, right? And all the devices. And who knew? When you're not on the go, why radiate yourself? You can just forward your cell phone calls to your landline. And a lot of people got talked out of maintaining their landlines. But you're probably paying the same amount of money for your internet and your cable connections as you would if you brought the landline back in. It's all usually packaged up together. So, you know, that's what I do. I talk on the phone with this landline phone, and I just forward cell phone calls. There's settings in your phone that allow you to do that. So first, you just hardwire. Second, you go into everything and turn off the antennas. Once I hardwired, I doubled back to my internet service provider and I called them up and I said, hey, I'm choosing to hardwire my technology. Not only is it safer, but you get a much faster signal. It's far more reliable. It uses way less energy, and it's much more sustainable than having to keep replacing all your wireless stuff every couple of years. So I asked the Verizon rep, you know, how do I stop that router in my basement from transmitting? And they said, oh, that's easy. Sit down at your computer. And I went, really? They said, yeah. So they told me how to get into my online account. They told me what my ISP or internet service provider address was. I just typed it in. And then they walked me through how to find the wireless settings. Once I was in that, I just went in and I saw there was a 2.5 gigahertz antenna and there was a 5 gigahertz antenna. And years later, we switched over to Comcast, and then they had additional antennas in there for hotspots where they were literally servicing their customers using my router, the electricity that I pay for, to throw signal out to the curb so all the Comcast Xfinity customers driving by could maintain a connection. I don't think that should be legal, but that's just another bad idea with wireless. So that's how I learned how to turn off the antennas. But because many of our devices today have a whole lot of antennas, it's really critical to measure. And like I said, you can get meters in the $200 to $400 range that are pretty good. You can ask your library to sponsor them. You can go in on them with your neighbors. But with the Internet of Things, if you aren't measuring, you have no guarantee that you've gotten all those antennas, or that new equipment that you're bringing into your home isn't radiating you and your loved ones. So that's how to have safe technology. There are other items that are being installed in our homes and communities that some of us may have control over and some may not. These utility smart meters are a really raw deal from a health perspective. They sold them to our towns because they used to pay a walker to come to everybody's home once a month and take a reading from the gas, the water, the electric, maybe propane. And they told our towns, listen, you guys will save money and not have to pay the walkers anymore. We can collect that data digitally. And so they started with the drive-by, where they had a guy from our Department of Public Works drive by our home once a month, put his scanner out the window on his truck and point it at our meter that's mounted on our home, get the reading, and then move on to the next house. So I understand for it's either our gas, maybe our gas meter, they leave those radiating antennas off all month long. When the driver comes into the neighborhood, they radio in and they turn the entire neighborhood on. They do the sweep, and then they leave the neighborhood and then they radio in and they turn off the antennas. So you're not being pulsated all the time. When I stepped down to the wall in my dining room where we've got a meter for electric and then we've got a meter for our solar system, I sat there and I measured how many pulsations of microwave radiation were coming into my home from those meters, and I did the math. In a 24-hour cycle, it comes out to 17,000 times a day. It's pulsing that microwave radiation. And I did a little 3-minute video of that to show the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities when we were testifying about these toxic smart meters. So they pulse radiation continuously. And remember how I said that microwaves really love metal? Well, they can hop on the pipes and the wiring of your home and basically turn your whole home into one giant radiating antenna if things aren't grounded properly. There are too many reports of fires and explosions, improper grounding. If there's been a power outage and the electricity comes on and there's a big surge, these things are not grounded. We are not protected with these smart meters. And then there's huge issues around privacy and data harvesting. Nobody is protecting us from this. And then again, at the medical conference, we were taught that these smart meters are one of the leading causes of microwave sickness. It's another really big environmental justice issue where industry goes into these impoverished communities where people are just trying to stay afloat and, work 3 jobs to keep a roof over their head and food on the table. They are not often able to pay attention to what's going on around them. They did that in Worcester, Massachusetts. National Grid came in with their smart grid pilot program and went way over budget. They wanted to turn around and charge the ratepayers or the customers for all the extra money that they had to spend to get this pilot up and running. Our government, through the Attorney General's office, got involved from the fiscal end of it, but we really need them to get involved from the public health end of it as well. And then what did National Grid do? They turned around and said, hey, we rolled this out in Massachusetts. So Rhode Island, New York, Connecticut, look at this great model. You guys need to jump on the bandwagon too. So it's a huge environmental justice issue, but it's also a really toxic solution for all of our communities. Odette Wilkins, who's with us tonight, just did a wonderful webinar in the last week or two with Chattanooga down in Tennessee, where they are not using a wireless system for their smart meters. They are hardwiring them into the homes, the schools, the offices. So it can be done responsibly, but we need to raise the issue because most of our public servants have only heard the spin from industry on how great it's going to be, and their promises quite often don't even come to fruition. So Jeremy Johnson is a Silicon Valley engineer. His wife is a medical doctor, and they both became very ill very suddenly. And they ultimately, there was nothing in her medical training that could teach them how their health was crashing so drastically. But they finally realized it was a bank of smart meters that went in on their condo. So Jeremy has done a wonderful TEDx talk. You might want to look at that. He's got product recommendations. He's tried everything, and he can quickly talk you through what products are credible, what aren't, and you can hire a consulting session with him if you're interested. Dr. Alexia McKnight is ironically a doctor of radiology, and she wound up getting fried by her smart meter, and she has now done a TEDx talk as well. So smart meters we need to be aware of. The cell towers that used to be, miles away in industrial parks, far away from our schools and our homes and our churches and our temples and, our medical facilities, they started encroaching and saying aesthetically, we can just paint it to look like your building. And if it looks like the building, well, then we can apply for an application to put cell antennas at close range right on top of people. So it's critically important that we look at the non-industry funded science, and we are so grateful that there are many, many, many studies done to show what happens within certain ranges of these cell towers and antennas. And the science shows there's a death and neurotoxicity curve at 500 meters, which is about 1,640 feet, the science shows that the death and neurotoxicity curve starts coming down at 500 meters. So that should be the minimum distance. Those death and neurotoxic statistics don't actually catch up to the general population till double that at about 1,000 meters or 3,000 feet. So we should never, ever allow any kind of radio frequency transmissions at close range. So you can look at the science. There is a website called antennasearch.com that shows us where these big antennas are. These are called macro cells. So you can type in any address in the US and it will give you a return of a 3-mile radius. And here in my small town, there are a couple few hundred within that 3-mile radius. When I put in the State House address in Boston, so I mentioned a couple few hundred antennas and fewer actual cell towers. When I put in the State House address in Boston, within 3 miles, there are 1,520 big cell towers with more than 4,500 of these giant antennas, all of them pulsating all the time. And we know people who have gotten very sick going into Boston. And this is happening to all of our major cities around the country, because wherever there's a dense population, that's where industry can make the most money. And then if you look at it from a neighborhood perspective, look at all these cell towers just in the one neighborhood of Hyde Park on Ruskin Road. This is just one neighborhood. And then we're now adding 5G small cells. 5th generation technology, not to be confused with 5 gigahertz. Gigahertz measures how much radiation is coming at us. 5G just means it's now the 5th generation of technology. We get a new generation about every 10 years. So that means 5th generation technology, and the industry is spinning it that we'll have faster entertainment downloads. We'll have smart cities, super highways. But take a look at who's buying up the entertainment industry as they talk about all these fast entertainment downloads. The wireless industry and their parent companies are buying up the entertainment industry as a revenue stream. Properties about this new technology is, one, it can't fly by itself. So we still have to have all those big cell towers to serve as the backbone. And those cell towers send our signal and data on these really long microwaves that can penetrate buildings and other objects. All that's left to monetize for 5G are these tiny little millimeter waves on the far end of the electromagnetic spectrum in the non-ionizing segment. And those little tiny waves, they're saying, will give us fast speeds, but they get interrupted by rain, by snow, by leaves, by trees, by buildings. And so what we see happening is the industry comes in, often literally in the cover of darkness at night, and starts lopping off the trees that would block the signal. And they are now putting 4G small cell antennas right at the curb outside of people's homes. And I know, like I said earlier, folks joining us tonight, like Anne and Odette, are fighting madly in their communities and really educating that these do not belong at close range, because inside these little canisters, some are hung on street wires, some are hung on the poles, some are at the top of the poles, some are on light posts, some are underground under manhole covers. They're bundling this powerful 4G and 3G into close range canisters with a whole array of additional antennas. So another new layer of radiation that they can turn on with the switch of a software update. So they're adding on, and their goal, because these little millimeter waves can't go very far or through objects, they're looking to put these every 2 to 12 houses inside our neighborhood, and people are literally waking up with a cell tower at the curb outside their bedroom window. And this is how dense it looks in Boston right now with just the 5G small cells, in addition to the thousands of the macro antennas. So the kicker is it's never been safety tested. There was a congressional hearing in Washington, D.C. with the Commerce Committee where Senator Richard Blumenthal out of Connecticut said to these two industry leaders, so please share with us, how much money have you invested in doing independent testing for biological effects to people in the environment? And these guys hemmed and hawed and ultimately admitted they know of no funding for independent testing from their industry. So Congressman Blumenthal said, so as far as health and safety are concerned, we're flying blind here. And then Computer World and others who track, technology said 5G is a bad joke. It's not even giving us the promised faster speeds. What we already have with 4G, we're not getting anything better. So it's just another revenue stream for the industry. And, last year in January, they were at Verizon boasting that they're bringing now 5G to 100 million citizens all over the US. This link here is not a popular one to bring up, but when we understand biologically what happens, our cells have only so much energy in them that's pretty well calibrated to get us through our regular day-to-day and to do the cell repair and regeneration while we sleep. When we have something like a 5G city where all this close range is pulsating microwave at us, it gets to be really hard for our bodies to keep up with that damage and try and repair and do the normal everyday cell repair and regeneration. So a lot of people get sick when these smart meters go in, when the cell towers show up at close range. And so we're already down a court. And then when you add on a virus like COVID-19, our poor bodies are waving the white flag saying, we can't do it. So Drs. Beverly Rubik and Dr. Rob Brown did a very heavily peer-reviewed paper, rigorously reviewed for all of their facts, that showed a statistically significant connection between COVID-19 cases and deaths and high exposures from 5G and other toxic installations. So it's not a popular one to bring up, but it is fact. And in fact, my own state rep, Jack Lewis, said, Cece, I was with you until you started talking about COVID. But I said, Jack, look, let me show you the actual science. And you look, because I know how smart you are, and I know you're going to get it. So just know this evidence is here. We're not saying 5G caused the pandemic, but we are saying that biologically it is a cofactor in the illness and the likely deaths that happen. Okay, so Dr. Magda Havas is retired from Trent University, Professor Emeritus, which means she retired with distinction. She taught electromagnetic radiation up at Trent University for a couple of decades. And she, in her retirement, is still working on this issue and recognizes that most of our governments are not doing anything about this, and they're certainly not tracking this cumulative exposure from all the infrastructure, all the smart meters, all of our devices, all of it. So what does the electrosmog look like today? So she has started this global EMF monitoring project, and she is inviting citizens to serve as citizen scientists and to go out there and to measure in our communities using a protocol that she has, where you would go down your main road and go to 4 or 5 different intersections and take measurements at each corner on each intersection. And she teaches us how to use the Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter. And we wave it so that we're gathering the data properly, and we do a quarter turn and wave it at the north, south, east, and west angles, and we write it all down, and then we enter it into our database. So that's how this data has gotten in there. That allows us to ask the question, can we brag about our community? And she uses that little acronym BRAG, where the blackout areas where it's very high stands for the letter B, 100,000 microwatts or better. R is high for the red, 10,000 to 100,000. A is for amber, 1,000 to 10,000, and green is 1,000 or less. And that 1,000 microwatts per square meter comes from a convention that they held in Salzburg some years ago that said, if you had a clean place where your body can do its proper cell repair and regeneration when you're not on the go, then if you were outdoors and the exposure was, 1,000 or less, you could probably keep up with the cell repair in your own space at night, unless, you happen to be right under a broadcasting antenna. So the goal outdoors is to be 1,000 or less. Now, if anybody is interested in purchasing the Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter, that's the one scientific instrument that's used for Dr. Havas's studies. And she's having us measure in our own home. She's having us measure our cars. So it's really nice to be able to contribute in a positive way. And as you can see, there are people all over the US and Canada, somewhat down in South America and Europe, Africa, where we're trying to gather these measurements. If you would like to participate and you haven't yet purchased the Safe and Sound Pro 2, if you reach out through the globalemf.net website and connect with them and say, I would love to sign up to help with the science, may I please have the discount code? They will enroll you in their program and give you a code that you can use to get, I think it's like a 20 or 25% discount on that $400 meter. So please join us as citizen scientists and let's see what we can do together. But here's kind of a reality check. The goal is to be 1,000 or less outdoors. I think it was Lori from New Hampshire who measured her fire department. It was in the green. In Keene, New Hampshire, a couple of years ago, it was already inching toward the amber. And now we've learned they're actually turning small cell antennas on at the curb near people's homes. So we anticipate that that reading is now higher. Nashua was already in the red. Up at the State House in Concord, it was in the red. And Stratham, where Deb and Representative Abrami live, they wound up putting a cell tower in right on their main strip. So they're in the blackout zone. And here in the North End in Boston, a resident and I went out and measured, and it was as high as 613,000. And this was where these pretty street lights, nice ornate, wrought iron looking things were installed, but this is actually a small cell antenna. Hanover Street is the main strip in the North End where we have just such a big tourist run because we've got all these amazing Italian restaurants and bakeries. But when you look above, there are residences. And so these are right outside people's homes. And when you go down to the cross streets off of Hanover and you take a head turn, you see that they put these small cells in there too, but not the pretty ones even. They put these ugly gray monopoles in, literally right outside people's homes. So that's what 5G and the Internet of Things is. But Martin Luther King gave us so much encouragement when he said that when social change actually happens, it comes through 3 channels. The public engages, which is what we're hoping to inspire you to do today. The courts rule and ultimately hold the guilty accountable, and public policy finally catches up, in this case, to the science. So I've got a number of additional slides that I have to share with you. I will whip through them pretty quickly now, just so you have a reference point of what's out there. And then on your own time, when you have the slides, you can go poke through and drill down to the facts, because we don't want you to take our word for any of this. We want you to get to a comfort level on your own knowledge where you're going to protect yourself, your family, and ultimately get some activity going inside your community, so we can all work together and push it up to get those federal laws changed. So when Dr. Shuren went to the FCC and said, oh, nothing to look at here, the FCC filed a determination in something called the Federal Register that said, yeah, our federal guidelines from 1996 are fine. We see no reason to update them. Once that got entered into the Federal Register, the Environmental Health Trust sued, Children's Health Defense sued, and a number of other parties across the country sued the FCC. They culled 11,000 pages of evidence of harm from the science, from medicine, from citizens, that was all formally entered into the public record with the FCC. They printed it out and gave 27 big fat binders to these 3 judges in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C. The judges are looking at all this incredible depth of evidence of harm, and they said to the FCC attorneys, so show us your homework. How did you determine that 1996 exposure limits, given everything we have around us today that didn't even exist then, how did you determine this is still okay? And the FCC did one of these and said, oh, the FDA said it's okay. So the judges, of course, asked, well, where's the FDA's homework? And they have none. Not one of our federal agencies has ever done the top to bottom review on the science. So we have these captured federal agencies. The FCC was sued by the lawsuits that were rolled together that were called the Environmental Health Trust et al. Versus the FCC. And the judges ruled against the FCC and sent it back to the FCC. They remanded it. They determined the FCC was arbitrary and capricious, which means they didn't use any facts in their determination to keep radiating the public at this level. They told the FCC to account for infertility, electrosensitivities, the impact on children, long-term impacts, because all of the testing that the industry does is limited to 6 minutes or half an hour, not this 24/7 exposure that we're immersed in electropollution today, and the environment. The documentation is thick on what's happening to the birds and the bees and the trees and all the other biomes out there. So it'll be 2 years on August 13th. It was actually Friday, the 13th of August of 2021. That the courts remanded it back to the FCC, and the FCC has done nothing. There are other lawsuits that have been happening. There's a petition with Americans for Responsible Technology that you can sign on to say we need to declare an emergency here. We need to declare and get our government to step up on this. Groundbreaking work here in Massachusetts. I mentioned earlier that Verizon turned on a cell tower on top of this neighborhood where their Board of Health, for the first time in the United States, issued a groundbreaking cease and desist order. Rather than coming to the table, there was already a commercial, good community partner that said, look, we've got land in this commercial district. We don't care if Verizon puts a cell tower here. It wouldn't impact anybody in a residential area. Verizon did not come to the table with their Board of Health. Instead, they went to the courts and put an injunction against the Board of Health to say, oh no, we think the federal law protects us. But the Board of Health had done their homework and gone to the state level advisories in legal at the Massachusetts Association of Health Boards. And they believe, and they want to take it to court to prove that when the industry says the FCC 1996 guidelines say we get to put these cell towers in, that no longer applies once it's in and transmitting in the community. If there is a pollutant or a nuisance in the community, it's now in the jurisdiction of the health board. And so Verizon put this injunction through the courts. The Board of Health knew it would only take them 1 or 2 pathways to take this to court. Sum total would only be $80-some thousand. And instead of backing their Board of Health, the mayor, the city council, the city solicitor, which told the Board of Health to investigate, they would not give their Board of Health the funding to take this to court to get these families safely back into their homes. So basically, they were sabotaged by their own local government. And so now citizens are having to sue the town of Pittsfield, the city of Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and with great thanks to Children's Health Defense for providing the legal resources, the judge has just determined they've seen enough facts to let this go to a trial case. And so we are waiting now. The administrative record is being prepared and put into the court records, and we hope to see some movement on that, hopefully by the end of this year. We also had a groundbreaking lawsuit here in Massachusetts. It's a very prestigious international boarding school where children were getting sick. And for the first time, the courts recognize that you don't have to have heat from a device to cause harm. There is biological harm happening at hundreds of thousands of times below that. So all these court cases build off one another. For the first time in the United States, the California Appellate Court found that Wi-Fi sickness can be a disability. And there are many other lawsuits happening across the nation and the world. So feel free to pound around in there. Moving into the policy arena, although we've had bills here in Massachusetts for a decade, we've advanced some out of committee, but we have never passed a bill into law to protect our children or ourselves or our environment. So the leading document in our country is out of New Hampshire. And this, as Deb mentioned, came from her state representative, Patrick Abrami. After we educated him, he put very pointed questions into his bill. Why have Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re, AM Best, and others long since recognized that wireless is a leading risk? And they have already put exclusions in their policies. They don't cover for damages. So that leaves our towns and our schools and our states on the hook for legal damages because the industry is not insured. Why does that legal fine print say to keep it off the body? And why is the FCC ignoring all those studies? And it just goes on and on. We allow 100 times more radiation than other countries do. And why is nobody looking at all these different sources of emissions that are hitting us all at once? We need to account for the cumulative effect. So we brought in the experts, and within 7 months, we got this passed into law. They spent a year with this incredible commission of highly qualified experts. We had doctors, we had engineers, we had scientists, we had the Attorney General's office, we had the Department of Public Health, and we had the industry at the table. 10 out of 13 committee members, commission members, voted in favor of the majority report that documents the conflicts of industry with our federal agencies and, the wireless industry. They also make 15 recommendations in the majority report to transition away from this toxic wireless infrastructure and devices to using hardwired technology. Again, it's not rocket science to fix. Bring fiber optics or high-speed cable or copper right to the premises, and then just hook up with wires and adapters indoors and turn off the antennas. That's what they recommend. They recommend getting our federal delegates back on board with all of this and labeling everything and getting our building inspectors trained on this. Because if you want to buy or lease a home, you need to know today, what are your radiation exposures? So excellent resources in that law and commission report. Dr. Kent Chamberlain was a career engineer creating medical devices and other devices that use electromagnetic radiation. He recently retired from the University of New Hampshire, where he chaired and taught in their Department of Computer and Electrical Engineering. And when he was appointed to the New Hampshire Commission, he thought, oh, this is going to be a slam dunk. Of course, Wi-Fi is fine. I've been doing this for 30 years. And then bless Dr. Chamberlain, because he is another one of the good guys who saw the harm after they did their investigation. And now he's done a complete 180, and he's trying to work with his industry in engineering to teach them the harm and to encourage safe technology development. And now he speaks internationally on this issue. He does a really good 20-minute presentation about the New Hampshire Commission report and provides his slides as well. So then from there, bills started coming out to try and affect the changes that need to be done to uphold the recommendations in the New Hampshire Commission report. The first bill tried to get setbacks based on science, so you can't put cell towers at close range. We also need to start collecting data and get a registry of harm. The industry torpedoed this, but we had some amazing milestones where Frank Clegg from Microsoft Canada sent in his testimony during the pandemic. And in it, he declares that wireless technology is no longer advanced technology. It's outlived its useful life as a main source of connectivity. Main source needs fiber optics to and through the premises. Use wireless sparingly, only for the moments that you need it, and keep it in airplane mode all the rest of the time. So their committee said, well, we're not going to pass that, but they voted 15-3 that, yeah, something should be done. So they kind of passed the buck to the next legislative session, which is this year. So Attorney Scott McCullough, who gave the oral arguments in the lawsuit that sued the FCC and won, he was very gracious to look at what New Hampshire has in the current law and see where they got hamstrung on their local control. So Scott McCullough rewrote their legislation, their law, and put in something that would restore local control to the local towns and make sure that when the industry puts in an application for any kind of wireless, that they account not only for the building codes, but for fire codes, electrical codes, and a new set of national standards that came out from a group called APCO that does site hardening to make sure that when a wireless communication facility goes in, everything's done properly. So if we have a man-made or a natural disaster, that it doesn't go down, that we can still communicate and we can still get what we need. And the industry wheedled their way in there. They had the state reps take out that part about the ANSI APCO site hardening standards for public safety. And once they stripped that out, then they voted the bill down. So it was just backstabbing in New Hampshire by these legislators who are only hearing from the industry, and they did not look closely at the evidence that so many of us provided to protect New Hampshire and its environment. But they say when one door closes, another window opens. And right after that big disappointment in New Hampshire, State Representative Tracy Quint from Maine reached out, and we collaborated with her, and she introduced a bill to protect birds, bees, insects, and children. And that bill was unanimously passed out of the House. It went to the Senate, where we understand there's heavy industry influence. It didn't go the first step there. It went back to the House for their second step, once again came out unanimously. So we're waiting to see if that will apply enough pressure on the Senate to do something meaningful in Maine. Connecticut had a good bill this session that it looks like industry took down again. We have 6 bills in Massachusetts. Some of these we've had around for years, including our schools, forming a commission like New Hampshire ultimately did, protecting the kids from handheld devices, smart meters. This time, Senator Mike Moore has put an emergency preamble because Eversource and National Grid are saying they need to replace their aging fleet of meters, and they want to replace them all with smart meters. So he has an emergency bill to, at least as a first step, give an opt-out if people don't want that on their homes. And the real solution is just to hardwire these meters to the homes and get rid of the wireless transmissions. And so we have a new bill this session that we've already had the public hearing on, but testimony is still able to be sent in. We have something called MAVEN, which is our Massachusetts state level health database. And we're asking that electromagnetic sensitivity be added to that database. And so doctors and local health boards can put in records of people and report the sickness that's happening in our communities. We also have a bill here too to bump up our civil rights law to say that people should have a right to ask for accommodations when they go out and about in society, into local businesses or stores or hotels. And it applies to all disabilities, not just electromagnetic illnesses. So we are trying, and you can go into bills in other states. I just learned of an amazing bill in Louisiana, and the doctor behind that is Dr. Holly Grow. I just interviewed her for our little TV cable station, and she started from where she is as an ophthalmologist and a corneal surgeon to talk about the dangers of being in front of screens so extensively. It's changing the shape of our eyes, it's damaging our eyes, our retina, our brain. So she has gotten a bill passed into law, and now Louisiana has a set of digital device guidelines that were done in conjunction with their Department of Health, their Department of Education, and their Office of Technology at the state level. And they have a whole set of guidelines to protect health from excessive screen time, and a whole bunch of doctors participated from their own specialties, from the heart, from obesity, from lifestyle, and so on. So lots of good bills to look at for bills in other states. And I just want to indicate, industry will come into our towns and they will tell your town, oh, if anybody, starts talking about the health effects or the environmental effects, they're just the NIMBYs. They just don't want this in their backyard. When in reality, there are groups all over the country that have already formed and are working very hard to protect their communities. If you go to this link to Americans for Responsible Technology, you'll see there's more than 150 groups. And if there's not one near you to connect with, they have guidelines there for you to start your own group when you're ready. So you can go through these and see that people are pushing back, they are fighting, and in many cases winning in their communities, especially if they fight it before cell towers go up. Massachusetts towns taking action. The city of Boston has already filed with the FCC. They've already joined other towns across the country to fight the FCC. We don't always win, but these are major steps in the right direction. Burlington came up with a small cell policy in Massachusetts that had Verizon withdrawing their 7 small cells when Burlington said, okay, our policy now says you can't just come in and drop and run with these antennas, as industry is prone to doing. If we approve this application, you have to come back every single year and recertify that these antennas are still compliant with the current law, and we're going to assess you a fee to do that recertification every year because we don't have the funds for it. So when Verizon found out there was going to be an annual recert on every antenna they install and a fee, they pulled out. They took their application back because they know they plan to put millions of these antennas in the curb right outside people's homes all over the country, and they didn't want to set precedent. So they withdrew their applications. Other towns looked at Burlington and are now adopting and making even stronger at every pass, stronger zoning bylaws. So lots of things our towns can do. And before we go, we'll give you the tools to get that started. A grandmother in Easton, Connecticut met with her local board. They have put a moratorium on 5G until it can be proven safe. Hawaii County put a resolution out, and there are actions all over the world. We don't know about it, so we get nervous about it, we feel shy about it, but once you are informed, you can go learn to the point where you might get to saying, over my dead body, are we going to keep radiating our kids and our environment? So in our schools, this is the law that Louisiana just passed. In the Netherlands and Finland, we are now today getting reports that they are pulling screens out of their schools because the kids are too distracted and they do not learn best behind a screen. And in fact, here in New York Times, they did a 3-part expose on what Silicon Valley executives are doing. They are banning screens from their children and even going so far as to have their nannies sign contracts that there will be no screens around their children. And yet they're pushing this at our kids every day. As I said, there's always solutions, and our friends at Grassroots Environmental Education, they have the Americans for Responsible Technology project. They have the Baby Safe project that talks about fetuses and how to protect a pregnant woman. They now have the Tech Safe Schools program, and they will, if you provide them a list of school administrators, they will send a packet out to your schools that show the science and the health impact, that shows the legal risk they assume if they don't get the wireless away from the kids and the teachers. But most importantly, they show how to remediate in a school and greatly reduce radiation today in the interim while they transition to safe hardwired technology. So please take advantage of these resources. The Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition has already built K-12 curriculum to teach about technology safety. Dr. Lexi McKnight and I did professional development at her children's schools on their Health and Wellness Day. So we've got a 45-minute program that we can roll out to your schools. And again, here's that little online course. We have bulk rates. It's less than the cost of a movie ticket, you know, right up front, but we will work with your schools to get them trained. And our friends at Environmental Health Trust have just a plethora of incredible resources that you can print out and give to people. Because when you open this conversation, you're going to want to have something to leave with them that's credible. So take a look at that. Maryland is the first state agency to recommend hardwiring, and they have now come out with a fact sheet on this. So many, many resources for you to use today. We have them for the professions as well. The first medical school textbook just came out this year, and Dr. Cindy Russell at Physicians for Safe Technology has an entire website to show our healthcare practitioners the facts, the science, and remediation, and what others are already doing to move in that direction. And then we have a whole host of additional resources for other professions like engineers, physicists, technologists, architects. So if you're a do-it-yourselfer, again, it's not rocket science to fix this in your own spaces. But if you're not, if you want to bring in a professional who can look for the radiation exposures, but also measure for another form of man-made harm, and that's the electrical wires that can throw off dirty electricity, they can test for that, for water, for mold, you know, the whole indoor pollutant arena. You can hire a building biologist. And then you can show this award-winning film, Generation Zapped. Our little sign from Ashland Public Schools was included in it, but you'll hear from world-leading experts, and in 74 minutes, you can have a screening in your own home, or we can do one in your library. I can be brought in to do screenings in your community, and it's now available on Amazon Prime and through streaming services at your local library. So it's a great way to very credibly open the conversation. Bert Wolf of PBS, he does his travel program. Camilla Reese, Dr. Erica Mallory Blythe, and others did 2 episodes, 2 half-hour episodes. So how cool is that to sit down and watch with your loved ones? And then here's this whole toolkit that our friends Patty and Doug Wood at Americans for Responsible Technology have for you to have the science, to have sample zoning code to protect your town. Because most of our town attorneys have no idea what the industry has done, and all they see is there's money that they'll get if they allow them to put these close range antennas up. So just be mindful how you use your technology, because our kids, it's monkey see, monkey do. If you're on your screens all the time, that's what they're going to do. So we need to model good behavior. I love this poster called 50 Ways to Take a Break. You know, if we're not on our screens, gosh, what did we used to do? Take a look at this. So many great ways to claim our lives back. And then Dr. Laura Conover did this amazing book. I had already read the science on grounding or earthing that reinforces that we get these healthy electrons from the earth. So we need to physically stay connected to the earth. But I'm like, I live here in the Northeast now, and I can't be barefoot outside for 6 months of the year. So how can I ground naturally? And Dr. Conover, she's a physician, came up with this wonderful book where she takes it through all 4 seasons and just gives dozens of great ideas to rebuild community, to get out there and to be one in touch with nature again. So feel free to take a look at that. At the municipal level, what we should march to is a principle that our government in the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention already has. It's called ALARA, which stands for we need to aim for as low as reasonably achievable. And the 3 tenets that they use is 1, create as much distance from a radiating device as you can. 2, spend as little time as you can get away with near a radiating device. And 3, if you can't get away from it, you need to know how to shield, and you need to work with a professional to do shielding, because there are very wrong ways to shield yourself from radiation. So now we need to apply those principles that they initially wrote for ionizing radiation. You know, that's why we wear a lead apron when we go to the dentist. But we need to apply those now to this man-made non-ionizing radiation, because that's still the right path to get us safer. So we have resources for you to take to your town. Here's a page on my research repository. This is the CDC page. And then there's this amazing free document that you can download called Reinventing Wires, the Future of Landlines and Networks, that talks our towns through why we've been sold a bill of good with this whole push for wireless. Fiber optics or high-speed cable and copper through and to and through the premises is what our towns need to invest in. And it's always critical to measure against biological effects, not these no good FCC limits, but biologically what's going to protect our communities. So what can we do? We can't kid ourselves, because there's no level of man-made microwave radiation that's been classified as safe in the scientific literature. In fact, Dr. Ronald Melnick, he spearheaded that big study with our government. He said, once something has been determined it's carcinogenic or causes cancer, there's no amount of that is not carcinogenic. So it's not safe to any degree. So we need to work at this at the local level. We need to educate the public. We are doing these 2 free webinars every single month, so you can keep learning and then bring others with you so they too can learn. And then you can build consensus in your community and then start working from where you are outward. And we can be brought in to do forums. You can click on ones that we've done here. We can teach your schools, but start where you are. What professional groups or community groups do you belong to? Folks are always looking for speakers, and that's my happy place. I love teaching the facts and what we can do. So every town should be forming safety committees. Every town should be warned not to let those smart meters in and at least give the public an opt-out. And then we should be changing our schools and libraries and other public spaces to hardwired with no radiation, and get our local zoning bylaws. There's a whole toolkit there you can look at, and our town attorneys are wonderful, but very few have any expertise in telecom law. So for short money for a town, for like $8,500, you can hire somebody like Andrew Campanelli, who can look at your state laws, look at your local zoning, and help you to fill the gaps with language in your zoning bylaws that will pass muster legally. So for today, start thinking about what you can do to reduce your exposures. Look around, notice what's radiating, start with baby steps, create that sleep sanctuary, because if you can't do cell repair at night, you cannot get out of harm's way. Migrate toward Ethernet cables and adapters, and keep all your stuff in airplane mode, and make sure, especially on the iProducts, when you look at your settings and it says that Bluetooth is not connected or Wi-Fi is not connected, you need to go into each of those and turn it off. Because when it says not connected, that means that it's still going, here I am, here I am, here I am. It's pulsating to make a handshake, even though it's not yet connected with one. So make sure all your antennas are off. And then look at Environmental Health Trust. You can print out these wonderful fact sheets and checklists. They have little cards you can get printed up, but always have something in hand so you can give others a good, credible place to start. So thank you very much for joining us. You can find Deb and her colleagues at New Hampshire for Safe Technology at gmail.com. You can go to their Facebook page. We have a website at Massachusetts for Safe Technology, and you can also reach me directly at maforsafetech@gmail.com. So thank you so much. We know this is like drinking water out of a fire hose, but if you would like, we can spend the next 5 or 10 minutes answering any questions if Deb has any in the chat.
So, Cece,
Yeah.
first, before we get to the questions, Odette would like to share information with us.
Sure. Odette, let's go ahead and spotlight you and thank you for all the incredible work you're doing at the federal level, but also what you're doing in New York City. So yeah, share. You're still muted.
Okay, great. Let me just turn on the.
Let me say, Odette is a corporate attorney who has been working in technology for decades, and she's not somebody to be messed with. She looks so sweet, but man, this is a powerhouse of a woman. So go ahead, Odette.
Oh my goodness, with that introduction, I don't know if I can live up to that. All right, well, hello everyone. I thank you very much. This was so informative, and every so often I'm able to come on. I have the luxury of coming on, and I have the luxury of coming on today. What a great presentation. Wow, brava, bravissima, Cece. I wanted to let you know that we hold national conference calls every other week, and we talk to organizations from around the country and actually from around the world. A lot of organizations come to us from Europe, and we talk about best practices. It's amazing that the successes that we've had so far in the United States have been able to make their way to the United Kingdom. And they have used our best practices in order to win their issues on the local level. And so they are very much looking at the United States to make sure that if we are having successes, they are going to have the successes as well. But if we are having failures in our legislation, they're going to, they see that that is a harbinger for them as well. So they have a lot vested in our success. And right now we are looking at 8 federal bills, that 7 of which came out of the Energy and Commerce Committee, 1 came out of the Natural Resources Committee, and they all are trying to take away all of the court successes we have had so far. And they have fashioned these bills in order to take away local control and to centralize control completely at the FCC, which basically means, and consistent with what Cece was saying in terms of the FCC being a captive agency, according to the Harvard publication and also the wonderful research that ProPublica has done, that the FCC is really a captured agency. And so if all of this control is going to be centered around the FCC, it's going to be industry dictated. And therefore, the setbacks that Cece was discussing with you and all of the important progress that everyone has made around the United States in order to protect their families, to protect their loved ones, to protect their health, will be gone. This
What can we do, Odette?
Okay. Now that I've given you the great apocalypse, what can be done is there are a couple of alerts that have now started to come out from the Americans for Responsible Technology and from Children's Health Defense. It's very important that you contact your representatives in the House, as well as your US senators, to tell them how bad this is, because this is really taking away control. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to take, they're trying to justify this by saying that they're trying to reduce regulatory barriers in order to bridge the digital divide. But in fact, what they're doing is they're increasing the barriers for you and I to get notice of these cell towers and these cell antennas outside of our homes. And they are trying to take away our ability to have a hearing and to be heard.
Yeah, so the democracy is just crashing when they swoop in and steal the local control.
Exactly. It is a violation of due process. So we do have a couple of alerts right now. However, that they only concentrate on one of the bills, which is a very bad bill. And that really culminates how bad all of these 8 bills are. And that is they take away, basically, they virtually eliminate environmental review under the National Environmental Policy Review Act.
And those currently protect us to some degree, and they're stripping away those federal bills or federal laws too. So do you have something like a script? Because for you and I, we can pick up the phone and call, but for people who are just joining the conversation, they don't have a depth of knowledge to really be able to talk to this. But if we give them a few sentences, they can just call up and even leave a voicemail. It's a numbers game in our legislatures, we've learned. If enough people aren't speaking up about an issue, they've got a lot on their plates. They're just going to go with what industry is telling them to do. But if we can even give them a few simple sentences to say, my name is Cece Doucette, I am a constituent in Ashland, Massachusetts, and this is what I need you to represent me on. Please do not let these bills pass. These are HR, yada, yada, yada. Do we have a script to empower people to do that?
We're just about doing that. We were just discussing that at today's meeting, and we're going to have that script. We just wanted to get out a couple of alerts, just push those out, and you, I believe you do have already the links for those two. So that's something to start with.
Yeah, I'll resend that. I sent out a blast last week with the Americans for Responsible Technology, and Children's Health Defense has a system that allows, just with the click of a button, to put in your name, and they will send it directly to your legislature up in Washington, D.C. Right now, they have about 11,000 people who have taken advantage of their system and sent that action alert out. They need hundreds of thousands of people to do this. So we're so grateful for the ease, because we're all so busy. If we can make it quick and easy, that's what we want to sign up for.
Well, we're going to give you by next week or the following week, we will have a script for you. We will have the talking points. We will have everything that you need in order for you to negotiate with your legislator. Okay. So right now we have the 1-2 clicks from Children's Health Defense, and we had to start somewhere. We had to quickly get something out, but we're going to have something more methodical and really to show the constitutional violations.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Yeah. Oh, Odette, I'm so sad that you had to come into this space to fight for safety in your community, but I am so grateful for the incredible work that you do day in and day out. I know that can you tell us when your national call meets?
Oh, yes. It meets every other Friday, and we're going to have our next call, not tomorrow, but next week on Friday.
Oh, okay. Yeah, if you want to pop that link into the chat, that would be useful for people. And I know I do this cable show, and thank you for being a guest. We have an episode with Odette talking about the nightmare in New York that she is just championing there. And you wouldn't believe how many of the neighborhoods that she has gotten it activated on this. So hats off for that. That half-hour episode is out at WCCA TV, but that slot they've given me often conflicts with when Odette's holding her meetings. But I've done these calls to action at the state level here in Massachusetts, and I've written scripts. So if I can't make it to your meeting, if you want to show me the script, I'd be happy to weigh in before it goes out if you want. So
absolutely. Thank you so much, Cece.
Odette, thank you for everything and for joining us tonight. We're so grateful.
Also, Odette, people were asking if you can specifically put the bill numbers in there too. So.
Okay, yep, I can do that.
Thank you.
Okay, all right, Odette. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and thanks.
Thank you
for joining
I'll
us.
type information in the chat. Thanks.
Okay, we have some questions, Cece.
Okay.
All right, first was Erin, and she had asked about Comcast had told her that she could not turn off her wireless, but I can tell her that I have Comcast, and for 6 years, since 2017, I have had no wireless. And the only way that it can be done with Comcast is to contact their tier 2 tech department. When you call, you will get their regular tech and they have no idea what you're talking about. They'll just tell you to put it on bridge mode or do something else, and that does not work. You just directly ask for tier 2 tech and they will turn off 5 antenna. There's a home security antenna and a public and a private of the 2 different 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. And just make sure you have a meter to ensure that happens. But I have done that at my house several times, and I've done it at family members. And if I just call them up and ask for tier 2 tech, they do it. And it's never come undone from them in 6 years. So
Excellent, Deb. Thank
hopefully
you. for
that
sharing
answered
that.
your question. And then next we had Leslie actually had 3 questions. One was, are the PowerPoints going to be available, which they will be available with the video, the slides. You can click into anything that Cece did. You'll be getting those probably within the next few days. And then she had a question about satellites. Is there any legislation? Hold on here.
I can ask,
Sure, jump right.
yeah, I live in Santa Barbara and our house shakes once a week when Vandenberg launches their 55G Starlink satellites. And I wonder, maybe Odette knows, what if there are any attorneys litigating against the Elon Musk Starlink satellites, because there are 42,000 right now.
Yes, there's an attorney, Julian Gresser, who is tracking the satellite situation. If you have any specific information that you'd like to convey about that, especially the experiences that you're having, please send me the information to the email that I just put in the chat.
Okay, to be more clear, I know maybe tracking it, but no one's litigating. No one's
Well, he would be the one
suing.
Yeah, he would be the one who would be litigating it. So I think at the point where it's ready for litigation and there's funding for litigation, then I think then he would proceed. But we have to have a very good, solid case in which to litigate. You don't just litigate and hope to have a good result. If you litigate, you have to make sure that you have a very good probability of winning. Otherwise, it's worse. But he is the one who's in charge of that. He's been reviewing that on an international level as well. So if you'd like, you can send me some information to my email and I will forward it to him.
Thank you. Yeah. My
Wonderful,
other
lady.
question was,
Thank
how
you.
do you wire smart meters, and how, if they were wired, how would you get them transmitted to the base stations where they go?
Odette, do you want to talk about that, given your recent work with Chattahoochee
Well, I'll tell you, Chattanooga,
or
Tennessee.
Chattanooga? Sorry.
Yeah, Chattanooga Choo Choo. Remember that song?
Yeah.
Chattanooga, Tennessee has everything hardwired, including smart meters. And it's the EPB, that's the Electric Power Board of Chattanooga. It is a utility that's owned by Chattanooga. It was formed back in, I believe it was the 1920s or 1940s, and it was done by statute. So they own their utility and everything is hardwired. They initially had wireless connectors because they still didn't have it all hardwired yet. They were putting in the wires, and they found that once they put in the wires, that they were getting information at a much better and more efficient rate than even the wireless. So the wireless connectors wasn't really cutting it for them. That's what they told me. And so they were doing a fiber connection anyway, but they saw that the benefits of a wired connection were far better and far more efficient from a business standpoint.
Great, thank you so much. Excellent questions, Leslie. We're so delighted you joined us tonight. Thanks. Deb, any other questions?
Yes, there's a question here from RL, and I can either read it or you can ask it yourself. That's entirely up to you. All right. Do you have any ideas specific to oncology, leukemia, and EMF to give to an oncology ward currently treating a new onset adult leukemia? What would you recommend other than MD's Safe Tech sites? The Martin Paul PhD review human cell efforts from the July 2018 Journal of Environmental Research. Thanks. Any more suggestions?
Yes, there are 2 resources that you might want to consider, and that is the new textbook for medical schools that's just been released, and the slide for that is included in what we'll be sending out. And 2, the EMF Medical Conference, which is not available at this moment, but Libby Kelly, who's the executive director of that conference, is working toward putting those videos back available to the public. The 24.5 continuing medical education credits will not be accompanying that release, but at least the content and all of the knowledge passed down through that conference will be available. In my personal research repository, which you can get through Massachusetts for Safe Technology, if you go to the resources page, I have a link there to cancer, and you'll be able to pull up individual studies and other resources on cancer and prevalence that you may find helpful. Okay. Other questions, Deb?
I think that was it. Odette just answered the last one.
All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much for giving your time generously tonight. We look forward to sharing this recording with you and my slides, and so grateful to everybody who joined us and chimed in and shared and learned. Come back as often as you want. I know it's a lot to take on, so take something tonight. Maybe think about creating a sleep sanctuary, see if that makes your life a little brighter, and then come back and learn more and bring your loved ones and your legislators in your community with us. They come and listen and train with us as well. So thanks, everybody. Have a tech safe day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Cece. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Deb. Bye-bye.